Recording in progress.
Greetings, everyone. Today, our topic is intercultural living. And your speaker for today is Father Anthony Gittins. Father Tony, here you go.
Thank you. Good afternoon, or good evening, good morning, or good yesterday, or good tomorrow, whoever you are. We're going to talk about something which is very, very topical right now, intercultural living. You probably noticed recently that Pope Francis went to Canada to apologize. And one of the things that he was primarily apologizing for was what is called cultural assimilation. And cultural assimilation basically means to say that you have a dominant group, whether it's a dominant culture or a dominant community, a dominant society, and you are willing to take in people from outside on the condition that they drop pretty well all of the markers of their identity in order to join you so that they can become one of you. And this is essentially what happened in Canada and in many other places in the world, where missionaries went into foreign lands and thought that they had the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and therefore, at any cost, they could, bamboozle or seduce or flatter the local people into joining them. And some of them wanted to join them because they perceived that deep down what the missionaries were offering was very, very valuable. But it cost them their identity. Very often it cost them their language, it cost them their culture, and many other things. So cultural assimilation, as Pope Francis pointed out, very late, but still better late than never, is a sin. It is a sin. And 50 or 60 years ago, most religious communities operated with that model. Not cultural assimilation, but community assimilation. You come into our community, you can be as different from us as you like, provided you don't bring those differences in to our community. Provided you learn our language, you speak our language, you learn our rules, you learn how to pray, you learn how to use your space, you learn what privacy is, and so on and so forth. And any alternative ideas that you may have are not acceptable. Now, if you can do that and assimilate into us, you are welcome. And if you can't do it, because there are so many people knocking on our doors and wanting to join us, we can afford to let you go. Nowadays, of course, the tables have turned, but not just because we have very few people or relatively few people trying to enter religious life, but because the models have changed and the attitudes have changed. And what we're talking about today is not cultural assimilation, but intercultural living. And the word living is very important. We're not just talking about interculturality. Interculturality might be a state. Intercultural living is a way of being, okay? And what I want to suggest to you, more than a suggestion, it's a really kind of conviction, is that the future of international religious life requires people to learn how to live as an intercultural community. So we have to clarify some of the language first. International. International simply means people are with different passports, operating in the same community one way or another. And international has nothing of itself as a word to do with God. Intercultural is very much to do with God, because intercultural is a theological word, unlike international. International can apply to all kinds of things, not necessarily including God, not necessarily excluding God. But you may be, and many communities are these days, international, meaning to say that people from many different nations constitute the community itself. You are not necessarily, therefore, intercultural. Now, if interculturality is a religious, a theological understanding, it means that God is involved, and it means that the reasons for our trying to be an intercultural community are God-motivated, God-inspired, and so on and so forth. So we have to clarify a little bit of the terminology. There's another word that has nothing necessarily to do with God, and that's the word multicultural. And multicultural simply means people living together but separately. Now, I used to live in uptown Chicago, where in 2 square miles there were 100 different nationalities. I never tried to learn 100 different languages, or even one more. I coexisted quite well with the local people, and they coexisted with me. But essentially, for them to manage, they had to learn how we do it. And we were managing, and therefore we didn't have to learn how they do it. Okay. So in a multicultural community, you can live alongside other people, but you live in your own little world, basically. And if you have a multicultural religious community, you may have people from Korea and Mexico and the United States living under the same roof, but they all live in their own little worlds, or they could if they were multicultural. So multicultural of itself doesn't imply God's activity, whereas intercultural does. It means an intentional shift of our orientation and a different way of doing things. But there's one more word that we need to kind of identify, and I'll put a few of these out. I'll put intercultural on the board there. And this other one is cross-cultural. Now, these two words belong together because they require each other and they both rely on God. These are now two theological words. The social sciences, like social anthropology or sociology, uses these words without reference to God. And there's another one that we won't look at today, enculturate. Enculturation. I'm an anthropologist. I was trained as an anthropologist and I lived in Africa as an anthropologist for many years. Anthropologist colleagues of mine used to write to me and say, Tony, have you heard of this word enculturation? And I would write back to them and say, yes, it's a theological word. And they'd say, okay, thanks for the information, not interested. Okay, because social science is not interested primarily in God. Enculturation is primarily for people who are interested very much in God. And they are interested in how God works through and in and by culture. We can go there today, but that's not a God word. So there are three theological words that are widely known in the broader culture, but not as theological words. They are known, actually, enculturation is not widely known. And even within theological circles, it's terribly badly misunderstood. We won't go there today. These two words, though, we have to hold on to. The first one is, the way we get at this is by looking at the vocabulary. If we describe a culture as a group of people who share an awful lot in common, we usually talk about something like 70% of their understandings are shared, their language, their sense of direction, their sense of place, their sense of meaning, what they do together, what they believe, by and large, identifies people of the same culture. There are other people of culture B or C or D or whatever beyond them, but each one maintains its own little world. So this is a monocultural world of people of culture A. Now here you have a world of people of culture A living next to another world of people of culture B. Okay. Now the B people are living in their own world, and the A people are living in their own world. But the cross-cultural person is one who deliberately undertakes to leave home. This is home for the A person, to leave home and to go into the homeland of another group of people as an outsider, as a B person, as an A person, in a B world. Now, this cross-cultural person leaves home deliberately. That's why this is a theological word. A cross-cultural person for us is one who leaves home for God's purposes, okay? And in leaving home becomes the stranger, the outsider, among people all who share each other's understandings. So the people who are the B people are all at home. But the A person who has left home is now without a home and is a homeless person, a stranger, an alien, among the B people. And the cross-cultural person undertakes to learn how to live among people who are different. Okay? So the A person does not become a B person. And the B people do not become A people. But the A person who has left home finds a new way of living among an alien people or an unfamiliar people, and therefore has to adjust. Is not simply assimilated, but has to learn about culture B. Now, for anybody who is going to try to approach intercultural, cross-cultural experience is a necessity. I understand that your community has people from India, Pakistan, Africa. Okay. So those people are all required to be cross-cultural people as they encounter an intercultural community. But let's say you have an intercultural community with no Americans at all, just people from Nigeria and people from India and people from Mexico. Every one of those is already cross-cultural before they come into the new community, because the new community, I mean, it may have existed before then, but in a different kind of way. And they have got to get used to it. So they have got to do an awful lot of learning. Now, every international religious community is obviously founded in a particular place, therefore has a particular history and a particular language. If that original community becomes international, then it will cross language barriers, and the original language of the community will add another language in a new community, and perhaps a third language, by which I mean world languages. Okay, so a French community that becomes international will most likely have English as one of its languages, and then a third language. It could be Portuguese, it could be German, it could be Spanish, it could be Italian, it could be anything. But if it's a world language, then some people will be able to speak that language. They may have their own tribal languages, they may have their own local languages, but they'll be able to speak that. So if you've got three, and normally international communities have three international languages. Anybody joining that community already knows one of those languages. Okay, so the Nigerians already know English. They may know Yoruba or Tib or Idoma or many other. There are 200 languages in Nigeria. They may know one or two or three of those, but they also know English, which allows them to become members of an international community. They must learn another world language. The fact that they know Hausa or Idoma or Yoruba is not enough in an international community. So they must learn either English or Spanish or French or whatever it happens to be. But if everybody in an international community from now on has two international languages out of the three international languages of the community, then everybody will be able to communicate with everybody else. But if they only have one language, everybody else will have to speak their language, which is what has happened in the past, where the dominant language has been English, either because it's American English or Australian English or South African English or any other kind of English, but English has been the dominant language. And other peoples have been assumed or assimilated and told that they must learn English. So for my money, from now on, everybody in an international community that hopes to become an intercultural community, on the day that they take their first vows, they have to take one more, which is, I will learn another international language. Because otherwise, in 20 years, you will not be able to be intercultural. You will be multicultural, living your own little lives with people who speak your language, but not being able to speak to everybody. But if you have two of these three world languages, you can speak either in your own native language or in the language that you've learned. Okay. But the future of international religious life really, really requires that. So then intercultural living then becomes something that I can describe very briefly, but I've not got very much time to do this, as something like this. A multicultural community is a community where A and B and C and D are living together separately, okay? And there's a straight line between the two of them. A multicultural community has a line, but it's not a straight line, it's a broken line. which means to say these people can and should get to know each other. These people can and should get to communicate with each other. And so it is for these people. So you get culture A coming into a new community, culture B doing the same, culture C and D doing the same. And the purpose of an intercultural community is to create another culture, which will be culture E.
Oh,
See how it works?
yes.
Now, the A people will learn to be part of culture E, and the B people will learn to be part of culture E, because culture E will be the life they live together, okay? And then anybody else coming into the community will need to learn how to become part of this community, which is an organic community. And an organic community is not just like an institution. An organic community grows like a flower. It grows like a vegetable. It grows like a human being. It grows like a family that changes every day, from the day that the mother has the first child to the day that the mother and the father die and the generations continue after each other. All the time it's changing. And it's changing because everybody is influencing everybody else. Everybody is learning from everybody else. And everybody is trying to live in peace with everybody else, which is hard enough if you all speak the same language and have a lot of shared exchanges, but it's more challenging with that. Now, I've got so little time left. What I'm going to do is I'm going to offer this to Sister, and she can put the letter E in here.
Okay.
All right. I'm going to offer this one in a minute to Sister, but I'm also going to identify a couple of things before I offer it to Sister. And that is a couple of the characteristics that we look for in an intercultural community. So, intercultural living is very different from international community or international realities, where people have their own passports and live their own special lives, separate lives. It is specifically how we live our faith and how we live our discipleship in a situation of multiple differences. Okay, that's what intercultural living is. Secondly, if it's about how I live my faith, I need to remember that the only way I can live my faith and the only way anyone can live their faith is culturally. You're not born with culture. Culture is how you learn to be yourself in your own circumstances and community with your own language. Okay, so faith is part of how you grow into your own identity. So if intercultural living is about how we live our faith, then we cannot live our faith through somebody else's culture. Okay, I cannot leave my culture at the door because my faith is attached to it and I'm attached to it. What I've got to do is bring my culture with me, try to find the way to live my faith culturally outside of my own culture and with people of other cultures. It can be done, but it means that everybody will learn to live their faith slightly differently than if they were in their own culture, surrounded only by people like themselves. In other words, it is a matter of conversion, a matter of transformation. Okay. Faith can only be lived culturally. So in an intercultural community, whose culture are we talking about? We're talking about culture E, not about culture A or B. So it's not going to satisfy everybody all the time. It's going to be a new way of living faith and a new way of living discipleship, because we'll be in a new context. We'll be in a new area, geographically or spiritually or any other way you want to think about it. We'll be in a new world, a world of difference. And instead of fighting against difference, as we've always tended to do, we want to learn how to live with difference, because difference was created by God. God created us as different from each other. And therefore it is good, because God said it is good. Look at what I've done. All different, fantastic. It's good. Now learn to live with it. And we don't like to live with difference. So we like to live with assimilation, because it keeps us in control. So next one is intercultural living is not natural, but it is supernatural in the sense that we have to learn something new. But because we are motivated by theology, by God, it's a faith journey, okay? So I'll give you a little definition of what I think intercultural living is. It is authentic discipleship lived by different people of different cultures together, okay? Authentic discipleship lived by different people from different cultures with different languages together. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, different cultures, different people. That's what we're trying to do here, okay? And then it is something new for most people, and it requires a major shift of understanding. So I'll give you that, and that can also go in there.
Okay.
And then in the last couple of minutes, I want to do something, and I think what I might do is, no, I can't have this on, I can't see this and show this at the same time.
I
So
did
what-
put it up ahead of time.
Yeah, I know that. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to show you what the title is, and the title is From Invitation to Radical Welcome. Okay, and we've got three columns. Okay, this was the old model of assimilation of religious life. This is an interim model, and this is the one that we're striving for. And I'm just going to take you through from this model with its strengths and weaknesses to this model and leave you there. Okay. So the first model was called the model of invitation. And the message was, you come and join us and share the riches of our cultural and religious life. It seems reasonable. The purpose, though, was to assimilate people. Okay. We invite new people to become one of us in our community. Okay. We're already trained. We're already formed. We already know the rules. We don't have to change. You come, you change, you adapt, and we accept you. And what was the outcome? Well, the outcome was numbers were encouraged. This is my time or your time, okay? Numbers were encouraged. There were lots of people wanting to come. And we could afford to say, sorry, you're not going to make the grade. And so you leave either because we ask you to leave or tell you to leave, or because you decide, you can't live with this. So they encourage numbers, but the community is very monocultural. Okay, they all operate out of the same model. Okay, those who are different become marginalized, or ultimately, leave. That's the first model. That's the model of my training and formation. The second model is called not invitation, but inclusion. That's a very different kind of model now. And the message now is come and join our community, but help us to diversify internally and internationally. See, originally, the international communities were comprised of provinces, and the French province was composed of French people who spoke French. And the German province had German people who spoke German. Mm-hmm. And if there was a British province, it had British people who spoke English, so on. So you separate development. Okay, now we're talking about something very different. Help us to diversify. Now the purpose is incorporation, which means embodying us together in a real community. And the marginal people are welcome so long as they, knuckle down and learn how to live the way we want them to live, because the community's style remains the same. The language is, well, you're very welcome. We want you to help us. But the behavior is the same. Do it this way. This is the way to do it. Put the garbage there, make your bed this way, go to pray now, pray this way. This is silence, this is noise. We need to know the difference and so on. So what's the cost to the community? Well, there's some cost. It preaches, but it doesn't practice inclusivity, real inclusivity. There is a power differential. Some people have the power, the authority, the means. Other people don't have the same power or authority. They're not able to make the same kind of choices, and so on and so forth. It requires self-analysis, and it requires community analysis, usually from assistance elsewhere. And then the outcome of that one is there's a high turnover of members. Whoever isn't mainstream is silenced, sometimes very, very clearly and explicitly, or made to leave. And so the community remains largely monocultural with few exceptions. as with, for example, African American sisters in American religious life. Okay? There are a few of them. There are very, very few in any given community, but the given community is mostly white operated, white run, and not African American in spirit. And the African American women have to find other ways of retaining their identity and living their spirituality, because they don't find enough support or even understanding in the community, because the community is very largely dominant culture and does it the old way. So finally, we have a community that we are calling Radical Welcome. Now, the message is bring your cultural and religious values, bring your voice and yourself, and help us together, A, B, C, D, to become E. Everybody's needed for this. This is not just a community of assimilation or a community of incorporation, it's a community of incarnation. In other words, we are all living, we are all culturally identifiable, but we are living with and among and becoming culturally pliable or culturally adaptable, so that we become much more able to operate authentically among people of other cultures, which means to say we have to do some relearning. So the purpose now is that the community will be transformed by each person's talents, and all will contribute to a new bloom in the garden. There'll be a new something that wasn't there before. That's the future of intercultural, religious, international life. Now the cost of the community is significant because it's striving to practice real inclusion and be mutually enriched by new and culturally different ways of living the faith. That's the big challenge. Culturally different ways of living the faith. And the outcome then is that the community evolves organically from day to day. Difference is dignified and respected, provided, of course, it is consistent with the purpose of the religious community. Authority does not dominate, but respects everybody. And there is a common commitment and vision, a common commitment to the mission, and a vision of God's call. And that's about 20.
That's wonderful.
And you can have that. You can have that.
Okay.
Oh, good.
I thank you. Thank you, Father Tony. You have given us so much to think about, both in our own small community where we live and in East Chicago, but also as the sisters hear this from the different countries, from all 5 different countries, and they think about the future and what will our community look like 20 years from now and 50 years from now.
Right.
So thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us, and we really appreciate that. And that ends our presentation for today.